are these people?
I feel like I've had a theme the last couple of months, and the EI makes it easy for me to do. So, I've wanted to bring actual voices from what's happening in Gaza from the people that are there, and because I don't think that's done enough. So, we're going to continue to do that this evening. So, I don't even know the name of this voice. They asked to stay anonymous at the EI, but they wrote this on the 7th of May, so not too long ago. But they write, "The walls of a nylon tent are very thin. Our neighbors were just a meter away, though it felt like they were even closer. The tents were so tightly packed in the Yarmouk Stadium in Gaza City that I heard every sound as if there was no barrier at all. One evening, it would be a neighbor bathing. I could hear the buckets being filled, the water splashing, even the zippers being zipped. In the next moment, it was an argument or a conversation, most often about food. This is my share. Don't pretend you didn't take extra yesterday. Or, we waited in line for hours and now there's nothing left for my children. How is that fair?" People's lives were unfolding right beside me with only a thin piece of fabric between us, barely enough to divide space, let alone protect dignity. From tent to tent, our different noises blended into each other, but each sound was distinct, even silence. Just I could hear every detail of their lives, they could hear mine. Neighbors knew when my husband and I whispered to each other. When the baby woke up crying, they knew if we had managed to get food that day, or if we hadn't. Even outside the tent, my life was exposed in a way I'd never experienced before, with comments on my clothes or other matters. No emotion could be held in private. Our lives were open books, unwillingly read by everyone around us. Personal space no longer existed. My husband, 6-year-old daughter, infant son, and I lived in a tent at Yarmouk Stadium from July to December of 2024. Before the war, the stadium was the site of soccer games. Then, Israel used the stadium in late 2023 to detain, interrogate, and torture men. We set up our tent, a few plastic sheets and pieces of nylon stretched over wooden poles in the heat of summer 2024. The ground beneath was sand and dirt, which turned to mud when it rained. There was no insulation from the heat during the day or the cold at night. The plastic made it unbearably hot when the sun was out, and at night it offered no protection from the biting chill. We had no partitions inside, just a few thin mattresses laid directly on the ground, shared by the whole family. The flap we tried to close with a piece of cloth and rope served as the door to our tent. We had no bathroom, no running water, and no electricity. Only a single shared light bulb was outside the tent, powered by a generator that rarely had enough gasoline to work for long. In the tent, there was no such thing as me. It was a space for survival and nothing else. At night, my children would ask, "Why are people always yelling?" How could I explain to them that real walls are not just made of bricks, they're made of privacy, of dignity? Breastfeeding my child at the time was a suffocating task, physically and psychologically. I had to cover myself entirely with whatever large swath of fabric I could find, even in the unbearable heat, just to provide some measure of privacy. I constantly feared being seen. I felt helpless, not being able to give my child the comfort he deserved. Before the war, I lived with my in-laws for 5 years. Though they were kind, it was a great relief when my husband and I moved into our home in Bet Lahia in northern Gaza in April. It was for me the embodiment of peace, a room with a door I could close when I wished, a kitchen to cook any meal I wanted, a space adorned according to my taste and preferences. In May 2024, we were forced to evacuate to a relative's house in the Al-Daraj neighborhood of Gaza City, where 15 of us were crammed into a room that would comfortably fit 4. And I doubt very comfortably at that. There, the psychological war began. I couldn't change my clothes without asking everyone to look away, as if my body were no longer my own. I couldn't cry when I needed to cry. There was simply no space for sadness. I would escape to the bathroom to sit in silence for a few minutes. but knocks on the door would come immediately. Hurry up, it's my turn. Even my silence had no place. I thought that overcrowded room was the worst it could get, but in July 2024 at around 4 a.m., that very house was shelled while we were inside. We rushed to the basement and stayed there until 7 a.m. When the situation calmed down slightly, we were able to leave. It was a terrifying night, and we left with nothing on our backs. We fled again, and this is when we moved to the tent at Yarmouk Stadium. One night, the suffocation inside the tent was unbearable. I needed a minute alone. I walked out into the dark, sat behind a piece of rubble, and cried. As I was on my way back to the tent, my neighbor asked gently, "Are you okay?" "I heard you." We returned home in late January during the ceasefire. The walls of our home were falling down, the house had been burned, and the tiles were cracked. We tried to make it somewhat livable by covering the open area with plastic sheets. I was finally able to cook the meals my children had longed for during the war. Those dishes they once whispered about in the tent, and I would have to ask them to be quiet so others wouldn't hear the names of those dishes and feel their pain. But we did not stay long in the north. Israel began their attacks again. We are now in the all-nicer neighborhood of Gaza City, living with my husband's family. My husband, my 2 children, and I live in a storage area. No door, just a curtain at the entrance. Since the storage area itself is divided up into many areas, we use blankets as partitions. I think about our old home often, where I had a room and my children had rooms. Having a room might sound an ordinary privilege to most people, but this war has taught us the precious value of basic necessities. I have no strength left and no patience for the utter lack of privacy. I am just a woman who wants to close a door behind her and a space to be alone to cry in. I want to be me again. Thoughts, Care Bear? I mean, just sucks.
The idea though, and someone in the chat said it. I think it was let me see. I think it was Natalie. No, Jacqueline. Private space should also be a human right, along with food, healthcare, and housing. Like it is truly, like, I could say that for me because I live by myself. It's truly a privilege to be able to do that. But I think, in times when you're stressed and you need to step away, even not for a few moments, it's necessary. So the idea that you cannot do that, but being constantly reminded of the pain, and like you're in a tent, so it's not like
Yeah.
you have a wall to at least kind of muffle the noise. You're hearing everything. So you're constantly bombarded with the noise and probably, depending if it attacks, the screaming and the despair, like constantly. Like,
Yeah.
I can imagine it will drive you nuts. So, so mentally, I can't even think about what I would do mentally. Like, even during the pandemic, especially being isolated, even among ourselves, and I think for me, like, was extremely hard for me. Actually, I was sharing with a friend over the weekend, initially during the pandemic, because I don't mind being alone. Like, I'm an introvert. Like, I thought it was the best thing. And then a month or 2 into it, I realized, no, this is actually the worst thing for me because I realized I'm more social than I believe myself to be.
Right.
So, but the fact that you are constantly bombarded with noise, even unintentional, and then like having to hear that constantly and not have any solace in that, I can imagine can be a mind trip.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Especially for the length that they've had to deal with it, So, but I mean, people who've lived amongst family members, even for, prolonged periods of time slightly, you could imagine how that goes down. Sometimes you just need breaks. So, but I just thought, we should continue to bring stories from the voices of those people. So, you You'll be surprised at how many won't. But yeah. And doing that is most likely why we're demonetized. So you could scan that QR code on your screen, ko-fi.com/indienewsnetwork, into your URL bar, or, it's always in the description below if you want to give us a few dollary dues to keep us afloat. But we get it. Times are tough. You're probably one of the poors like ourselves. You could just do the algorithm stuff, like and subscribe, sharing the video, and, leaving a comment, letting us know what you think. Otherwise, thanks for watching.